Hi everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. We're back again, and our guest this week is Zoe Proctor. Zoe is the admissions director at Hilltop Montessori School here in Brattleboro. It's been here for 52 years, which is hard to believe, as part of our community. She was born and raised in Guilford and Brattleboro, and she now lives in Westminster West with her husband Ian Proctor and their daughter Nico. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Zoe. Nice to see you.
Yes, nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's great to have you on the show, and it's great to hear about Montessori. You know, I was thinking that Brattleboro, for the size it is, has so many schools for kids of all ages, and it's really been a hub for different kinds of education over the years.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah, and Hilltop, which, as you said, started in 72?
Yes.
Yes, 72.
Yeah.
It's been here that long.
Yep.
And it started, how did it start? Was it preschool?
Yeah, so it started for us, a small group of families who were looking for a preschool option for their kids in 1972. And so it started, yes, as a small preschool classroom called Hilltop Nursery School, and that was at the West Village Meeting House in West Brattleboro. And then after a while, it moved to the Center Congregational Church on Main Street.
Yeah.
And then it moved up to High Street, and then moved to what was then the Austin School for the Deaf.
Yes.
And is now Winston Prouty.
Right.
And then in 2009, moved to its current campus, sort of, I think, our forever home.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Which is the most hilltop of all the hilltops.
Yes. I mean, and when we were at Austin, that was definitely felt like we were on a hilltop.
Yes.
And, you know, the West Village Meeting House is hilltop-ish. But yeah, when we were in the basement of the Center Congregational Church,
it was not
very hilltop.
No, it wasn't
but
at
kept
all.
the name throughout.
Yeah, I think that you had a really interesting experience, because it's really been your lifetime experience being involved with Montessori.
Yeah.
Your mom being a Montessori teacher. And before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about when you were a little kid. You were in Guilford for the most part?
Yeah, I grew up in Guilford.
In Guilford.
Yeah.
And you have 6 half-brothers?
I do.
Yeah, but they are all quite a bit older than you are.
Yes,
So
they're all older.
in some ways, you, I would imagine, were somewhat of an only child for some of those years.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
My oldest brother's 20 years older than me, and my youngest brother's 8 years older than me. So, and just also because they were, most of my brothers were on my dad's side, were sort of based with their mom, and I was based with my mom. So, yeah, it was definitely an interesting sort of dynamic of having all these siblings, but then sort of being an only child.
Yes.
Too.
Yeah. You, in some ways, you had the best of both worlds, I would think. Or that's one way of saying it, right?
Sure.
As you said, you were kind of raised by your mother and your grandmother.
Yeah.
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 And that was your mother's mother.
Yes.
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 And how was that growing up? Three women.
I mean, I think probably when I was really young, you know, I didn't know any different.
Right.
But definitely even into my teen years, really started to understand sort of how special that was. And we were very close, all 3 of us. And so, yeah, it was, I mean, I think I'm really grateful, you know, looking back that I had, you know, that sort of intergenerational experience.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yes, and influences from both of them, I would think, would have been very different as well.
Yes, and they were very different.
Oh, really?
Too. Yeah, my mom and I were very similar humans in so many ways. But my grandmother, both I think being sort of a woman of her time, you know, she was of the Great Generation, and she had a certain sort of naivety that for a lot of things, but she was also a very accomplished artist and musician and world traveler, and she lived all over the world and had a really amazing life, actually. A really fascinating life.
And she must have had stories to tell.
Yes.
I would guess about that.
Yes.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a really wonderful and very interesting lady.
And was she pretty much hands-on from the time you were a baby?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
Must have been great for your mother as well.
Yeah.
So your mother was teaching Montessori,
Yeah.
and when she started teaching, were you already of the age to be going to school?
No, I was not born yet.
Oh, before you were born.
Yes, before
Okay.
I was born. Yep. So she started teaching in maybe like 84 as an assistant at Hilltop. And then eventually by like the late 80s had become a proper classroom teacher, and then eventually the lead teacher in that program. So I really, when people ask me, how long I've been at Hilltop, I say really since like I was in utero.
Yeah, right.
Because then she would bring me to school when I was a baby, and I have a baby blanket that was made by the students in her class.
Wow.
I, would nap in the head of school's office, Tonya Wheeler, who was the longtime head of school there.
Oh, yes, Tonya Wheeler.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah, she's wonderful. And so, I used to nap in her office. And then I started going there when I was 3. So.
Yeah. And going back just a little bit before we go deep into Montessori.
Yeah.
So when you were a kid, and I know that all of our memories of being a child, are different and skewed probably in some ways, but they're still our memories. Are there things that you particularly remember from childhood?
Very much outside.
Uh-huh.
We had the beaver pond by our house, which has changed a lot over the years, but when I was a kid, there was sort of a section that was just sort of like a mud pit. And I have a lot of memories of like playing, like putting on a swimsuit and just like playing in the mud pit. I was little, but yeah, very much outside.
Yes, and often by yourself, right?
Yes, yeah, often by myself, building forts and stuff. And I mean, it was really just me and my mom growing up.
Yeah.
So that's sort of mostly what I remember. Yeah.
Were you a reader?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I was not as avid as a reader as Ian, but
Your husband, no.
Yes.
No one is as avid as Ian Proctor for reading.
Yes, I was definitely a reader, and I had to be too. I mean, we didn't have TV or stuff like that. I was a writer really more than anything. I wrote a lot when I was a kid.
You
and
did.
a lot of stories and
Has that continued?
Not to the extent I thought that I once would. Especially now with a toddler.
Well, not only do you have a toddler, but you have another child on the way.
Yes, I
which
do.
Is pretty exciting.
Yes, baby number 2 coming in December.
In December.
Yeah.
Yes. So get ready.
Yes.
Get ready, folks.
Yeah. It seems crazy.
Well, time becomes like a different kind of commodity.
Yes.
When you start having kids.
Yeah.
As you said, your mother brought you to school, to Hilltop Montessori, when you were in arms.
Yes.
Not only utero, but in arms. And that's something that Hilltop accommodates, because you were able to bring Nico to school as well.
Yeah, I mean, and it's harder for teachers, but being in administration, I have a lot more flexibility. And yes, I mean, Nico was essentially with me at school from when she was about 6 weeks, and I started going back sort of part-time until she was almost 10 months. I feel super lucky. I mean, my coworkers and our head of school are, so, I mean, loving, and also, know about what it means to have a child, right? Because here we are in education.
Yes.
And so I was very supported, and I mean, I would bring her in and often just like pass her off to whoever was walking by, and they would like go take her somewhere, and it's great.
Well, it's interesting because it is a community.
Yes,
right?
Very much so.
Yeah. And that's accommodating all ages,
yes.
And all experiences as well. I would think that would give a real cohesiveness to the school itself.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of people, I think, including myself, who are sort of very dedicated to the school and have been for a long time. I mean, we just had 2 teachers retire this year who were both my teachers. Cheryl Matthews, who was there for 38 years, teaching in our Children's House program, so ages 3 through 6. And Tom Griffith, who was teaching for 30 years in our upper elementary, so 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So they both just retired this year. And, you know, over the past handful of years, we've had a handful of people retire who have been there, you know, since forever, decades and decades. And the one that remains, who's still there, is Finn Campman, who was also my teacher. He's now the only one still remaining who was one of my teachers when I was a student.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of people who have really dedicated their lives to the school, and I think that amount of care that is intrinsic to that, when people are really committed to something like that, I think that really comes through in the community and in the curriculum, and I think that's really special.
Yeah, well, it's a culture, and you know, preparing for the show, I was reading up on Montessori because I think all of us are acquainted with Montessori in one way or another, but don't really, you know, have a real understanding of the philosophy and the pedagogy that goes with it, and so. Actually, if you, as the admissions director, I'm sure that you've got a good little description for the public of, you know, Montessori in general.
Yeah. So, you know, Montessori is sort of based on a few fundamental pillars, I guess you could think of it. There's sort of the understanding that each child is an individual and learns in their own way at their own pace. And that children learn by doing. So, you know, the Montessori classroom, which we refer to as the prepared environment, is very intentionally prepared. We don't, like in our early ed classrooms, we don't have toys for the sake of toys. Everything has a reason and a purpose behind it. It's often multidisciplinary. And so there's a lot of opportunity, you know, children are constantly interacting, you know, with tangible materials and learning by doing. Practical life is another sort of pillar of Montessori pedagogy, and that's the care of oneself and the care of the environment. And the practical life curriculum really encompasses a lot of things. And in our, you know, in our younger classrooms, it's you know, sweeping and wiping and pouring and scooping and a lot of fine motor development, window washing, which is incredibly popular with the little ones. You know, and then that sort of grows and evolves as the children evolve. And at the middle school level, practical life looks like apprenticeships and learning how to do interviews and make phone calls and, you know, do those sort of real practical life skills that you need to sort of be a independent member of society. And that independence, I think, is really a huge part of what we're doing. You know, moving again from when they're little, from physical independence to sort of mental and spiritual independence. And I think that's sort of intrinsically intertwined with everything that we're doing.
Yes, I think it's fascinating the fact that that the kids are doing such practical things. Like I was reading something about it. Instead of having a kid's toy, like a little kitchen as a toy, you have them actually using real fruit, you know, instead of wooden fruit and that kind of thing. And the window washing is a great example of this. And it would make so many parents happy to have all their kids get into window washing, right?
Well, and Maria Montessori said, you know, that the work is the play of the child.
Yeah, right.
And especially those of us with children have observed, you know, you do something and your small child wants to copy you.
That's right.
You know, whether you're doing the dishes or you're sweeping the floor, you know, getting dinner together, like they want to be participating in that because that's what is interesting to them.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of capitalizing on that sort of natural interest and then expanding on it. Yeah.
Another thing that that really impressed me was the whole notion of praise and praising children.
Yeah, so a big part of what we're trying to instill, starting at a young age, is a sense of self and everything that goes along with that. So self-autonomy, self-reliance, self-actualization, and self-motivation. And so, there's this sort of thinking that if praise is coming from an external source, then you're always doing something for that external, for the validation of that external source, opposed to doing something because it gives you, internal satisfaction and, sense of pride or accomplishment. And so we have this whole thing about not saying good job.
Yeah.
So instead of saying good job, which sort of doesn't, what does that even really mean? But, instead sort of validating and affirming what the child is doing, often with excitement, so you draw a picture of a field of flowers, right? And instead of saying, oh, good job, or that's so beautiful, I say, oh, wow, look at all those flowers. I noticed that you used a lot of purple. Can you tell me about that? Or oh, I see that that flower kind of looks like a tulip, just sort of engaging in conversation with them. We also, especially with the little ones, you hear a lot of, you did it, which now my daughter says a lot at home. So she'll put on her boot and she'll look at me and she say, I did it. And it's yeah, you did it. And sort of understanding and encouraging the fact that children and young children, all children are so capable, and I think so much more capable than a lot of society sort of gives them credit for, whether that's around physical independence or mental independence. And so sort of giving that, encouraging that sort of inner validation.
When you hear a new idea like this, it shifts things for you. As soon as I heard that, it was oh yes, because your example of the drawing is you are observing something that the child did, and acknowledging that they did it and pointing out through observation what's there. And so therefore the kid can actually have some agency and realize something about him or herself.
Agency, I mean, that's huge. And exactly that, because then you'll see sometimes kids who just do a scribble and then hand you the paper and you say, oh, it's so beautiful, but they're just doing it for why, it doesn't really mean anything or hold any value for them.
So you could say, oh, you did that so fast. Right? Something like that.
Right.
You have not grades so much as age groups together.
Yeah, so it's sort of both. So we do still have grades, but it's more that there's less emphasis on a grade, and it's about not putting children in a box just because they're in a certain grade. So yes, all Montessori classrooms are mixed age. So one of the wonderful things about that too is that the older students really become leaders in the classroom and are able to teach the younger students while also sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of reestablishing their own knowledge. And that's a really wonderful thing to see, that we see in real time all the time.
So they're learning mentoring, actually, at a really early age. And leadership, and what does that mean? And helping another person.
Right. And beginning to rely on each other opposed to relying on an adult. The classroom is not, we don't have desks. There's no front of the classroom. It's a child-centered pedagogy, and so the teacher is very much not the center of attention. So the teacher's not at the front of the classroom dictating to the child. The teacher gives lessons. The morning work cycle, which is sort of the vessel of Montessori curriculum, is a 3-hour period of time every day that's the focused academic part of the day. So children come into the classroom, they have some sort of group circle, community meeting, and then they have their morning work cycle. And so children are moving around the classroom, choosing work off the shelf, they're working independently with a friend, and that's interspersed with individual and small group lessons. And so they're able to, we talk a lot about freedom of choice and freedom within limits. And what that means is that there are limits and parameters, expectations that are set up by the prepared environment, by an assignment, by the curriculum, and then within that is the freedom of choice. And so children are largely taking charge of their own educational journey, and again, bringing it back to that agency and that sense of autonomy, and so they're structuring how they want to do their morning. Do I want to do my language work first, or do I want to do my math work first?
And also, I would think that the teachers are constantly observing.
Yes.
Yeah, more than teaching, they're actually observing
Yes.
each child and what each child is headed toward.
Yeah, very much so.
There's one thing I ran across that said, Montessori said that kids are innately orderly, focused, and self-motivated and should be given freedom to choose what they learn, which is, I think about this whole new phrase or newish phrase of helicopter parenting, right? Which is pretty much, not necessarily that it's the opposite of that, but it's having, I think, perhaps an innate faith that kids will gravitate toward things that they want. Again, this is Montessori saying that children in the first plane of development, ages birth to 6, prefer reality to fantasy. Children are fascinated with the natural world. And I think that we forget this, that, if you put almost anything in front of a kid under 6 years old, they will wonder about it, and they will want to explore it.
And definitely that sort of reality-based learning and curriculum, and everything that's in the classroom has a purpose and is based in reality. We don't have toys for the sake of toys. We don't have a fantasy play area. We don't have books about unicorns or talking bears, and so there's sort of a couple reasons behind that. One is to sort of base children in reality as they're learning to understand the world.
Right.
And how do you tell the difference between a unicorn and a horse when one is real and one is not?
Yes.
And also that exactly that, just that the natural world itself is so fascinating and magical.
Right, yeah.
And so, again, really trying to sort of capture that interest in reality and sort of the fantasticalness that is nature.
You go up to 8th grade,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So middle school, I think, is a whole other period in one's life. I know it was for me and probably you and probably all of us.
Yes.
And I think that you have a different way of teaching at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our middle school program is a skills-based program. It's very project-based. There's a lot of individual work, but there's a lot of group work, and so it's 7th and 8th grade combined. At our other program levels, all of our teachers teach all of our subjects, but at that program level, our teachers are specialized. And part of that reason is sort of as they're in their younger years, seeing, you can be interested in all kinds of things. You don't have to hyper-focus in on one thing, and then sort of flipping it a little bit. And when they're in their middle school years, really seeing people who have a real passion for something.
Yeah.
And it's a 2-year oscillating curriculum based around the question, what does it mean to be human? And that really influences everything that they're doing. And so almost all of the curriculum is presented to both 7th and 8th graders. And so they spend 1 year talking about, one of their main humanities studies is talking about world religion and spirituality. And that all is sort of tied back again to this sort of age-old question that humans have been asking: why am I here? What is my purpose? What does it all mean? And then the other year, looking at the history of the United States and social justice movements, looking at civil rights and women's rights and LGBTQIA plus rights and class and really just social justice movements as tied in with American history. And both of those studies are capstoned with a trip that we call the Odyssey, where we go somewhere else for a week and learn from experts and people who are actually boots on the ground doing the thing that we're studying about. So when we're studying world religion and spirituality, we go to Boston. visit mosques and synagogues and churches and places of non-denominational spirit, and then New York City on the other year and visit with human rights lawyers and former Black Panthers and immigration activists and queer rights organizations.
Yes, right. So it's reality.
Yes,
it's really
and very immersive.
Yes.
And hands-on in a new way.
So, Zoe, I know that you and Ian don't get much chance to get out for socializing these days, and you might have a little bit less time coming up as well.
Yes. We're not really like on the scene in the same way that we used to be.
Yeah.
But definitely we both spent a lot of our youth in Brattleboro.
Yeah.
And going to a lot of music shows.
A lot of music, right?
Doing a lot of things in town. And
you've known a lot of the really cool musicians in town, the stoner rock and metal people. Kyle Thomas, King Tuff, Ryan Barrett, Graham Brooks, Hannah Hoffman.
Yes, I do know all of those people.
I know you know all of them. And also, and we'll just touch on this a little bit, I know that there's been so much loss for you folks who are in your 30s, 20s, 30s, and now 40s over these years. And that's something, that is new. And I don't know if you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about, again, sort of about like what has shaped me as like a person, I would have to say that the main things would be, being raised by a single mom and my grandmother. I feel like my Montessori education really in a lot of ways, and which really encouraged me to question things and ask important questions and not be sort of blindly obedient, I guess. And then the loss of many close friends of both varying from sort of acquaintances to friends to very close friends over the past decade, really. And that, has been really huge for me, and I know many people in our community.
Yeah. So you have an acquaintance with grief that is perhaps unusual, although I think it's happening nationwide a lot for many various reasons. And are you finding ways, either personally or culturally among you who are younger, to deal with that?
Good question. That's a tricky one. It's become such a, it seems like on average, every other year, somebody dies for some reason. And, I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I think I'm still trying to figure that out.
Right, yes.
And, grief is such a non-linear thing and non-linear process. But, between Ian and I, and he's had friends, lots of other friends that I didn't know pass as well. So between us, there have been quite many. And I think that it's, being able to support each other and sort of acknowledge it and then talk about people.
Right.
My daughter's middle name is Jonquil, who's a friend who passed. And I think just sort of trying to keep thinking about people.
Yeah, and it becomes part of your life, and they continue to be part of your life in a very different kind of way. Yeah. So before we close, Zoe, is there anything else you'd like to mention? Or anybody else you'd like to give a shout out to?
I mean, I think maybe just to reiterate that I feel like some of the values that I think Hilltop specifically really helped to instill in me, and something that I think we're still trying to instill in our students is critical thinking skills and independence and an understanding and passion for social justice and climate justice, and the ability to ask questions and feel confident and comfortable in yourself, and you know, really take charge of your life and that sort of self-reliance.
Yeah.
And I think those are all really important lessons that school helped me learn, and that really shaped who I am, and that I think are really valuable life skills that I hope, you know, kids are still getting out of the program.
Yeah. And the community itself. Again,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's one thing that really strikes me is, you know, that this is a community, and it's a community within our community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zoe, thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for having me.
Yeah.
It was lovely to be here.
Yeah, it was great to have you on the show and to hear all about that,
Yeah.
and a little bit about your life.
Yeah.
And your kid, which is going to be plural
Kids,
soon.
plural, yes. Yes.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for coming and joining us today, and hearing about yet another thing in our community that is a pretty big part of it and has its influence, and hearing firsthand from Zoe what it was like to grow up that way. Tune in again. We will be back next week with someone else from the community, and we look forward to having you join us.